We cried, we screamed, but the world knew how to recognize what was happening to us.
But then there were two brief protests. First against the government's education policy, and then against a plan to build a big coal-fired power station in this part of Chile. The miners largely ignored the scuffles and moved on to a local museum, where an exhibition is being staged about their extraordinary rescue. The Phoenix 2 capsule that was used to haul the men to safety is now housed here. Mr. Piñera handed over a now famous note which he's had for almost a year. It was written by one of the miners underground and was the first indication that the rescuers had that the men were alive. "We are all well in the refuge, the 33, it says. But outside, the protests continued. Students tried to fight through police barricades to reach Mr. Piñera, whose popularity has plummeted since last year's rescue. Chile has been gripped over the past 2 months by some of the biggest protests and strikes since General Augusto Pinochet's military rule in the 1980s. It's all a far cry from last year, when the country was largely united in celebrating the survival of the 33 miners. Gideon Long, BBC News, Santiago.
Now, in a few moments, we'll be joined by viewers on BBC One when Riz Latif will have all the latest news and sport. Stay with us.
"31 American soldiers die in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. It's the biggest single loss of life for US forces since operations there began. President Obama said it was a reminder of the extraordinary sacrifices made by the military. America's biggest creditor, China, strongly criticizes the United States after the US loses its AAA status for the first time. The family of the teenager killed by a polar bear in Norway pay tribute to him as strong, fearless and kind. And England do just enough to beat Wales in a World Cup warm-up at Twickenham. Hello and good evening. 31 Americans and 7 Afghan soldiers have been killed in a helicopter crash in eastern Afghanistan. It's America's biggest single loss of life since the war began nearly a decade ago. President Obama paid tribute to the victims and said their deaths were a reminder of the extraordinary sacrifices made by the military. The helicopter was operating in Wardak province. The Taliban claimed they attacked the aircraft. Our correspondent Quentin Somerville is in Kabul now.
This was a Special Forces operation. We believe the US Navy SEALs were involved. Those Special Forces operations are not uncommon, but they are never routine. The Special Forces operation took place in Wardak province, just about an hour from here in Kabul. In Wardak province, close to the crash site, American forces fought to secure the surrounding valley. The Chinook, similar to this one, was returning from a battle with insurgents when it appears to have been hit by a Taliban rocket. The twin-rotor helicopter was targeting Taliban insurgents. Almost fully loaded, on board were 31 American Special Forces and 7 Afghan Special Commandos. All were killed. An eyewitness described the scene.
We were outside our rooms on a veranda and saw this helicopter flying very low. It was hit by a rocket and it was on fire. It started coming down and crashed just yards away from our house, close to the river.
Despite its proximity to the capital, parts of Wardak have been overrun by insurgents. In this mobile phone footage, the Taliban can be seen at an abandoned American base. American troops had handed the compound to Afghan security forces, but they'd been unable to hold it. From Camp David, President Obama gave his reaction to the heavy losses. He said, "Their deaths are a reminder of the extraordinary sacrifices made by the men and women of our military and their families, including all who've served in Afghanistan. We also mourn the